7 US warships were patrolling along the same route. A nuclear submarine was lurking in the background. P-8A Poseidons were conducting continuous surveillance. This was a routine nighttime mission. Suddenly, this rhythm turned into an operational alert. Initially, a small target appeared on the US Navy's radar screen. Based on its speed and course, it became clear that the boat was not an ordinary fishing vessel. A speedboat from Venezuela thought it could evade this network using secret routes. As it broke away from the coast, it changed course abruptly, increased its range, reduced its profile, and chose dark spots to avoid leaving a trail. However, aerial surveillance, helicopters on deck, and sensors waiting below deck had been monitoring this route for some time. Helicopters stationed on US Navy ships and a maritime patrol aircraft picked up the contact. Hailing warnings were recorded, but there was no response. The US Navy's pursuit of this boat lasted for minutes, and the calls to stop were again unsuccessful. Engagement clearance was given, and the US Navy's short-range precision munitions were deployed. The Venezuelan boat applied light discipline. It turned off its automatic identification system. It changed speed abruptly and pushed towards its destination, moving away from the coast. At that very moment, MQ-9 Reaper aircraft and MH-60 helicopters were waiting, combat-ready, on the decks. The net was open. The window was narrow. There was no margin for error. The chain of detection began with Poseidon at 0011. The anomaly in the surface picture was outside standard traffic. Course breaks, speed increases, and AIS silence converged in the same file. The target profile called for first shadowing, then interception procedures. The P-8A left a trail with its wide-area radar scan. The electro-optical turret acquired the thermal signature. It was relayed to surface elements via the link network. At 0014, an Arleigh Burke destroyer locked onto the radar image. The task force initiated the alert, intercept, neutralize sequence. The Reaper ascended. The MQ-9 Reaper serves two purposes for such targets at sea. 1. A fixed eye. 2. A laser. The MTSB sensor turret tracks the target in the visible infrared band, day or night. The laser designator links both its own munitions and those of another platform in the network to the target. It has long range, high endurance, and wide scanning. However, keeping the axis steady at sea is not as easy as on land. If the target jinks, or if waves and glare increase, a momentary interruption reduces the probability of a hit. 0021, the Reaper marked first. It forced the strike window. The target boat increased speed and zigzagged. The first firing window closed. The boat narrowly evaded the attack. This did not mean the chain was broken. On the contrary, it triggered the next link in the chain. Romeo was coming. In fact, Reaper's missed shot was not a misfire, but a short window shift on a moving target. The MH-60R Romeo approached the boat from low-medium altitude. They squeezed the boat from different directions at the same time as Reaper. Although the boat managed to fend off Reaper's shot, it had little chance against Romeo. Because when Romeo entered the scene, it generated the same laser spot, but from a different direction, and captured the spot left by the Reaper. The MH-60R Romeo is essentially an anti-submarine helicopter. However, the radar, FLIR, and semi-active laser-guided munitions it carries make it equally lethal against surface targets. The laser rangefinder designator links the Hellfire or 70mm APKWS type guided rocket to the target. The Hellfire, launched from the M299 launcher, follows wherever the light spot goes with its semi-active laser seeker. The moment the target enters the open area, the spot is fixed. The shot is fired. Neutralization occurs within seconds. The Romeo attack helicopter locked onto the boat and fired the Hellfire missile. Here, Romeo's advantage is simple. The line of sight to the target is not lost as it approaches, and the pilot's stabilization systems compensate for sway and sea glare. Therefore, the window missed by the Reaper brings Romeo into a more accurate geometry. That night was no different. The missile's encounter with the boat lasted seconds, and since the missile came from an unexpected direction, there was no chance of escape. The illegal organization members on board were in complete panic after the first strike and didn't even see the second missile coming. The boat carrying the cartel members was hit and caught fire with a single shot, then sank within minutes. Everything happened in an instant, and the ship was completely destroyed along with its passengers and cargo. Washington announced that the boat served a high-level Venezuelan-based gang network. Information that 11 gang members were eliminated in the incident was confirmed by U.S. Senate and defense sources.
The drug vessel was carrying drugs?
A drug-carrying boat, a lot of drugs in that boat.
So is it risky for the helicopter to operate so close? Yes, but sometimes at sea, it's the only sure solution. Romeo's advantage is that the pilot can see the target's jink maneuver right before his eyes. It can perform a double shot, rip pair, against lateral evasion with its second round of ammunition. The first hits, the second cuts off the escape. If the target boat is not lightly armored, even a single hit is enough. That's what happened in the final phase that night. Combat personnel executed the limited shots, maximum effect protocol. So what did the Aegis on the warships do? The shield plays a protective role, not a striking one, against such small targets. The ANSPI-1 radar clarifies the security zone in the overall picture. It keeps Romeo's approach-departure corridor clear. The link network keeps the coordinate speed direction information fresh between the helicopters, reapers, and ships. This is not the strike effect itself, but the protection that ensures the strike effect's security. Establishing such a clear chain in the field is necessary due to the rules of engagement. Is there a warning? Yes. Is there shadowing? Yes. Is there non-compliance with warnings and risky maneuvers? Yes. Then the next step is neutralization. This cannot be done without linking law and tactics. The Reaper's attempt to strike and missing the window is not a procedural flaw, but a typical result of a combination of sea glare and jink during a short parallel-to-shore pass. The helicopter's operation is a line-by-line application of the manual. When the operation ended, the US side shared the information that no personnel were harmed. Marco Rubio highlighted the operation's accurate targeting and terrorist connection. Trump's direct sharing also fully confirmed the incident. In February 2025, the US State Department added Tren de Aragua to the Foreign Terrorist Organization (FTO) list, along with certain cartels in Latin America. This status facilitates addressing the alleged threat in terms of financial access, arrest cooperation, and combat authority within the framework of terrorism. During the summer, Treasury sanctions bulletins announced new packages targeting the organization's leadership and associates. Recent Justice Department cases also supported this narrative. The FTO framework appeared in court filings. Thus, the narrative for Washington became simpler. The Caribbean buildup was framed as cutting off a narco-terror line extending to US soil. Meanwhile, Maduro's camp had been constructing a siege narrative for days, claiming 8 warships, 1,200 missiles around us. Washington, meanwhile, made no secret of maintaining a high-density naval presence in the Caribbean. These two realities converged at one point that same night. Florida Senator Marco Rubio also told the public, the US military intervened against a boat from Venezuela. The political meaning of these two statements was simple. The military chain of command had been activated in the field, and the political leadership had taken ownership of the incident. The next morning, on September 2, 2025, Donald Trump wrote, "On my orders, the US Armed Forces carried out a kinetic strike." Marco Rubio also told the public, the US military intervened against a boat originating from Venezuela. At that moment, the issue went beyond the fate of a single boat. It turned into a message traffic extending from Venezuela to Iran, Russia, and Beijing. When these three sentences are read together, the picture becomes clear. Washington is raising the engagement threshold in the Caribbean. Caracas is amplifying the image of siege to its domestic audience, and within US domestic politics, political figures are openly supporting the executive's rhetoric. There have been joint seizures with the Coast Guard and allies in the Caribbean for years. However, kinetic destruction is not a threshold, it is a signal. Because this strike is more than a single warning from Washington to Maduro, this signal reflects not only on Caracas, but also on the Moscow-Tehran-Beijing triangle via Caracas. Washington now views the Venezuela file not only under the heading of humanitarian crisis and electoral law, but also within the context of great power competition. The framework is as follows. military technical ties with Russia, UAV munitions cooperation with Iran, energy infrastructure digital surveillance, and oil for finance ties with China. The US naval presence carries the meaning of close contact with the logistical arteries of this complex network. In other words, the ammunition fired at the boat is a message of no distance beyond a Caribbean capture. That is why the fire that erupted on the boat illuminated 3 shadows on the map at the same time. Let's unravel the opposing bloc's connections so that the US's points of concern become clear. The Iran line has been discussed in recent years, not only in the Middle East, but also in the Western Hemisphere in terms of platform and component circulation. Sanctions packages adopted in 2023 also noted Venezuela-linked actors in networks supporting Iran's UAV program. This was a window opening onto the Western Hemisphere in a spiral of technology circulation, finance, and intermediary companies. Washington's concern is that this window will become a conduit for the UAV and missile ecosystem to the American continent. Therefore, the signal of engagement at sea is not just a tactical strike, but a supply warning. The message is clear: the back door will be closed. The Russian line has returned through symbols and industry. On the other hand, the Russia-Venezuela axis is not new. There is a history stretching from ammunition and platform heads to training and maintenance agreements, and even ammunition production infrastructure. The commissioning of the Kalashnikov ammunition facility in Maracay in July 2025 is a current example of this line. Such facilities are gaining importance as substitute capacity under sanctions pressure. The US presence in the Caribbean means staying close to the coastal transportation arteries of this substitute capacity. In the same vein, Russia's defense industry, under sanctions, has nurtured its relationships in Latin America with the rhetoric of mutual solidarity. For the US, this is an area that triggers the risk of secondary sanctions. This is because every channel through which defense components and ammunition circulate leaves a trace in terms of finance and freight. That trace can be cut off simultaneously at sea and in the bank. The Chinese line must be read separately. Caracas Lifeline has been the credit for oil model for years. There has been talk of a credit cycle exceeding $50 billion since 2007. Debt rollover remains a hot topic, as reflected in Reuters in 2024. Beijing has established a structural presence in the Venezuelan economy through infrastructure and mining contracts, as well as through the supply chain. There is also a digital layer. As revealed by Reuters in 2018, the Carnet de la Patria social identity assistance card system, established with the contribution of China's ZTE, offered a surveillance-oriented architecture that consolidated voters and social assistance into a single data body. The US's concern here is twofold. The financial layer produces loans and barter mechanisms that enable sanctions evasion. The digital layer increases the regime's resilience internally. That is why Washington views Beijing not only as a lender, but also as an actor that builds regime resilience. Beijing's share of the blow in the Caribbean is this geopolitical reading. Maduro's call that same week adds to this picture. The phrase "I called on China" means playing the Beijing card against US pressure. This framework reopens the question of producing resilience in Latin America with Asian capital from Washington's perspective. Naturally, the day after an engagement in the Caribbean, the Beijing file is brought to a separate table in Washington. Questions such as who is lending, what is the collateral, where is the data stored, are not political statements, but security statements. The calculation is different for China, but the result is similar. The financial ties created by the credit for oil model become costly as the risk of sanctions increases. The debates surrounding the data architecture established by ZTE are read in Western capitals within the context of internal control, external influence. All this does not answer the question, why is the US Navy there, in a single word, but it can be summarized in 3 words: access, surveillance, deterrence. Access refers to legitimate patrols in international waters and stopping regimes carried out with the consent of partners. Surveillance is the veil of information woven by sensor networks day and night. Deterrence, meanwhile, is a message to hundreds of speedboats with a single strike. Your speed, profile, and route are being monitored. If you misread, you'll be out of the game in minutes. This line is written not only for the target, but also for those protecting it. The message for Iran is, transporting technology and networks to the Western continent is costly. The message for Russia is, strengthening defense supply chains is visible and risky. The message for China is, building regime resilience with finance and data is a geopolitical choice and has countercosts. Of course, the risks are not zero. Every engagement at sea carries the threat of miscalculation. That is why the rules of engagement are measured in seconds, not minutes. The chain of evidence is followed to the letter. Platform selection is made within the effect side effect bracket. The emphasis on pinpoint strike in that night's attack illustrates this. Washington also emphasized international waters in the same sentence, taking care to remain on ground where domestic and international law converge. Because a single image on the sea determines politics on land. A misfire feeds a country's internal discourse for weeks. A well-aimed strike narrows a region's escape routes for years. Ultimately, the Venezuela file is not centered on a single player. Moscow is on the energy defense line, Tehran on the UAV munitions channel, and Beijing on the energy infrastructure digital network. Although each appears to be on the periphery rather than the core, together they form a network. The US move is not to break up this network, it is to slow it down. A slowing network wears down politically. Because promises are delayed. Every delayed project erodes legitimacy internally. Externally, as US visibility at sea increases, the risk premium for these partners rises. Small delays accumulate, leading to major fractures. That is the strategic goal, fluctuating but steady pressure. So while Maduro's allies provide economic, military, technological, and political support through various packages, Washington evaluates this through the lens of security. A strike at sea underscores this argument. The region is not a vacuum, and the networks are not invisible. The US Southern Command has been sharing information with its partners in the region for many years through networks such as JIATF South. A new layer of determination placed on top of that network turns a small spark at sea into a major warning. Thank you for choosing us.